Democracy is great, except when it produces the wrong result, such as the referendum over the crippling bailout deal the EU offered the Greeks, or Hamas's election in Gaza in 2006, or Morsi's in Egypt in 2012, or indeed every election Turkey has held for the last 13 years. A new entry has been added to the political lexicon to describe the unwelcome victor of honest elections. Such a being is now called a democratic strongman. Thus did The Guardian's Ian Traynor opine from a village 40 kilometres outside Budapest, where the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a football fanatic, is building a huge football stadium. But the Hungarian leader is not alone in Eastern and Southern Europe, where democratically elected populist strongmen increasingly dominate, deploying the power of the state and a battery of instruments of intimidation to crush dissent, demonize opposition, tame the media, and tailor the system to their ends. In Russia and Turkey, the two big former imperial powers that bracket Europe to the east and the south, President Vladimir Putin and the then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan lash out aggressively at opponents, trying and jailing opposition figures and routinely resorting to violence to crush peaceful protest. They are both popular and utterly dominate their national politics. So is Erdogan the Putin of Turkey? I'm not so sure Obama, who is increasingly relying on Turkey to buttress his failed strategy in Syria and Iraq, would quite see it that way. The New York Times editorial board was more nuanced in its disparagement of Erdogan after the June parliamentary elections, but carried the same message. Mr. Erdogan once seemed to offer a different future in which his Islamist party would be an enlightened advocate for enhancing democracy as well as the rights of religious minorities in a Muslim-majority nation. Turkey is a NATO ally, and for a while it took important steps to advance those freedoms in pursuit of a potential membership of the European Union. The New York Times leader continued, but Mr. Erdogan has veered sharply off the democratic path, crushing efforts to challenge or limit his powers. He reacted with excessive force to peaceful protests in 2013 and was dogged by a corruption scandal. He mishandled regional issues. His obsession with overthrowing President Bashar al-Assad of Syria caused him to allow jihadists to cross from Turkey into Syria to join the Islamic State. His refusal to field integrated defense systems and make military bases available to the American-led coalition against ISIS has raised doubts about Turkey's commitment to NATO. But hang on a moment. Was the June the 7th election such a resounding defeat for the party that has dominated Turkey for 13 years? The Justice and Development Party, known in Turkey as the AK Party, failed for the first time to win an absolute majority of parliamentary seats, as The Guardian reports. But it did resoundingly win an election with a turnout of 86% of the electorate. That compares to 57% turnout of the US 2012 elections. This is the 11th election it has won in the last 13 years. In that time, its share of the vote has ranged from 39% in local elections at 2009 to 49.8% in the general election of 2011. Even in an election where the AK Party found itself unable to form a single-party government, the opposition parties failed to emerge as national ones. As I explained in a piece I wrote for the Huffington Post, the Republican People's Party won no seats in 37 cities. The National Movement Party, which came third, drew a blank in 32 cities. The People's Democratic Party, which came fourth, had no representation in 56 cities. As Galip Delay wrote in AlJazeera.com, it is difficult to interpret this election as a defeat for the AK Party when the gap between it and its closest competitor, the Republican People's Party, was 16%. He wrote, "Two factors played major roles in the growing perception that the AK Party had suffered a major defeat. First, the AK Party's inability to meet its own high electoral standards, and second, the electoral victory of the pro-Kurdish People's Democracy Party, which came largely at the expense of the AK Party. The inability of the opposition to unite has been a major factor post-election. A government still has yet to be formed, and a second election could still be on the cards. Yazar Yakis, a columnist for today'szaman.com, which is close to the Gulenist opposition, wrote, "Harsh criticisms have been directed at the Nationalist Movement Party for having offered the post of Speaker to the AK Party on a silver platter by refusing to support Denis Baykal, the candidate of the Republican People's Party." Fellow columnist İlhan Yilmaz agrees. "For 7 years I've been writing that Turkey's most serious problem is its opposition. It's the lack of opposition that paved the way for the Justice and Development Party's despotic tendencies." Voters are still not convinced about the opposition parties, and their post-election failure to come up with creative solutions and tactics to tackle Erdogan's despotism shows once again that the opposition for some time to come will be an impotent force for a variety of reasons. Many AK Party voters want to desert the AK Party and vote for another party, but that doesn't exist. It seems that until such a party evolves either out of the AKP or a new one is established, the AKP will not decisively disappear. Terrible thing, this democracy. If about 4 million AK Party voters left their party in the last election, they headed en masse to the Kurdish party, the HDP. That in itself is an irony. The HDP became a catch-all opposition party, attracting Islamists, Kemalists and the Kurds. If it was indeed responsible for halting Erdogan's slide into authoritarianism, it was only able to do so with the AK Party's help. Whether the HDP keep their coalition again largely depends on which way the AK Party will go. There has been much talk of a coalition government being formed between the AK Party and the Nationalist Movement Party, as the FT shows, which is a fiercely anti-deal to give substantial autonomy to the Kurds. That manoeuvre is being associated by opposition media with the AK Party chairman and interim Prime Minister Ahmed Davutoglu, and they say a rift is developing between him and Erdogan, who wants another election, possibly in November, according to Turkey's Hurriyet daily news. Undoubtedly, the June the 7th result was a message to Erdogan. His supporters were saying, yes, we still want the AK Party to be the ruling party, but no, we don't want to give you as yet vague and unlimited powers as president. We still prefer the parliamentary system. Out of sight, but not out of power, as Reuters reports. Although Erdogan's ticket to give himself more power was not on the ballot, it became the main issue of the parliamentary election. Had AK Party got the required number of seats, it would have been able to force through the constitutional amendment, as reflectionsturkey.com tells us. This time round, Erdogan's head-through-the-wall approach deterred voters. Erdogan, the bare-knuckle street fighter, did not think through the messages he was sending out on the campaign trail. You cannot aspire to be president of all Turks and Kurds if you are forever casting your opponents or even former allies as plotters seeking to subvert the state, as this article by the Wall Street Journal shows. You make your task as president a gargantuan one if you have no way to talk to the opposition, even in your own ranks. His predecessor, Abdullah Gül, had. Erdogan does not. If you take the view, as I do, that Turkish voters are no fools, both Erdogan and the AK Party have got to go back to basics. The basis of their political success over the last 13 years has been their ability to deliver 4 basic promises. As I outlined in my article for the Huffington Post, Turkey is now a major economy. Turkey has moved substantially in those 13 years towards greater democracy and not away from it. The army has returned to its barracks, and the Kurds are now engaged in a political process. The HDP achieved that now, crossing the threshold into parliament and becoming the 4th largest party. The arrival of the pro-Kurdish Party in Parliament was cause for a great firework display, bringing election hope, as Middle East Eye reported. A Kurdish voter told MEE, "There was a time that I never thought I would see a pro-Kurdish party enter Parliament." But the Kurds now have to think carefully about how to get the breakthrough with the Turkish state they so desperately need. Kemalists may not be the right bedfellows, because it will inevitably involve calls for the HDP to dissociate itself from its military wing, the PKK. The best way of ensuring a peace deal with the PKK is for a substantial number of Kurds to vote for the AK party. It is not the result that the West wants, but the plain truth is that no other party can achieve the settlements that both Kurds and Turks need.